Welcome back to Royals Weekly. I am your host, Marcus Mead, and joining me as always, a man who went by the stage name Buttercup when he danced in college, my brother Mike.
This is why I should always read the intros before we get on, because I didn't read this one, and I don't have a witty comeback. You gotta. What am I supposed to say?
It's okay, Buttercup. You're all right.
Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to feed yourself. All right, I got a mouth to feed. All right?
It was a mesh tank top, cut off jean shorts, and the just most mischievous smile you ever did see.
That's right. They told me I could be a star. All right.
People think it's about the physicality. It's really about the personality behind the physicality. It's about what's inside, not necessarily what's outside. When you're on that stage, when you're moving and dancing and sweating and everything's coming out, and it's all emotion. It's all emotion.
They feel that. The customer.
You truly were just a small town girl on a Saturday night.
I was.
For the fight of your life.
Right? That's right.
Anyway, on this week's episode, we'll discuss the hiring of new pitching coach Brian Sweeney, the Rule 5 draft, before we go on to a wonderful interview with Royals pitching prospect Alec Marsh. That's right. Woo! During our Spotlight segment tonight, we'll air an interview I did with Alec alongside Royals Farm Report's Alex Duvall. It was very insightful. We touched on a lot of cool things about the Royals pitching development and what's been changing and what Alec thinks about those changes. Spoiler alert, he's, very excited about those changes. And so we're going to get to hear that interview that we did. Normally, we don't interview players and coaches. And the reason that we don't do that is because we're looking for a certain type of insight that oftentimes they're coached not to provide. They're sort of coach speak and player speak. We're not very interested in that. But I'll say Alec was extremely articulate, was very insightful, didn't, just do the surface level stuff. He went deep into explaining a lot of good stuff about pitching development and his process and what he's been working on, which is very exciting for this offseason. So look forward to that in the Spotlight segment. But before that, we're going to get to Rule 5 stuff, pitching coach changes, and a few other things. Mike, you ready to get started?
I'm super excited.
All right, then let's start with some coaching news. The big news since the last time we met with you about a month ago is the Royals finally hired their new pitching coach. They also hired an assistant pitching coach. They hired Brian Sweeney to be the new pitching coach for the Kansas City Royals. He comes from the Cleveland Guardians system, where he was a bullpen coach for the last few years from New York originally, and he has years. It was 4 years. Yeah, but was that all bullpen coach, or was he doing some other things?
No, it was 4 years as the bullpen coach. I think he was there for a year before that. Okay. I think they specifically mentioned him before that doing planning, like game planning, daily game planning stuff for him. So, kind of a special
from
assistant.
New York originally. Oh, okay. He's from New York originally. You can really hear it when he speaks. I listened to an interview that he did. He's got that awesome New York accent that I really like.
Oh yeah.
Mostly played in minor leagues and independent ball. That he did have 4 seasons on and off in the major leagues. Played a lot with Seattle in that time. He coached in the Phillies system as a pitching coach for a period of time. A guy whose reputation is built on being both analytically minded, but really good at sort of communicating with players and working with players and working on mechanical things and stuff like that. Every time you hear people talk about him, they say, this guy can take that information that exists in the analytics. He understands it really well, but he can make it really easy and accessible for players to take in, which was great to hear. Along with him, the Royals hired Zach Bovee to be the assistant pitching coach. He's been the Twins' assistant pitching coordinator he's been in their system for the last 4 years. Most recently, he was their assistant pitching coordinator. Another guy who has a strong reputation in the use of analytics. Mike, what do you think about these two hires as a whole and what it means for the Royals' major league pitching development, I guess? Because I'm going to start talking about the major leagues like they're the finishing school. They are the end of your development. Because what do you think about the hiring of these two guys?
I don't know much about Zach Bovee, but if you remember, I don't want to call myself a prophet or anything, but I put out that Brian Sweeney should be a target of the Royals back in the end of October? I don't remember when. End of September?
Yeah, it was the beginning of October when we did our season in review episode. We talked about pitching coach candidates, and you brought up Brian Sweeney. Actually, we talked about manager and pitching coach candidates. You brought up Quatrero and Brian Sweeney, so you actually did nail both of those 2 for 2.
I want my nickname to be the Prophet. All right. But anyway, I think it's a strong hire, largely because of some of the things that you mentioned. One, he's coming from an organization that you would love to emulate if you're the Royals, because they don't spend a ton of money in draft capital on pitchers, but they always have strong starting pitching and usually strong bullpens as well. So I love that he comes from that tradition. Also, if you look deeper into his background, at least in the article that I read, it talks a lot about how he was not really strong enough. Like, he wasn't a strong enough pitching prospect to ever get opportunities. So he had to do some things with analytics. He had to do some things with mechanics and understanding his own mechanics to give him that edge to even sniff Major League Baseball. And that's the kind of guy that I guess that I like. It also mentioned the game planning part of that, which I think is so big. You know, I love the idea that you're going to have a guy that has experience already writing up game plans for the Guardians, who are one of the best at attacking hitters and knowing pitch usage that you need to have and all this sort of stuff. So that's really exciting to me. I think Brian Sweeney is going to have a lot to work with in these young arms and have a very positive impact. Like I said, I don't know much about Zach Bovee, but he does come from the Twins, who have also had been able to do a lot with not a whole lot of capital, not a whole lot of spending. So good on them for going out and getting both these guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to think about, right? Remember that the Royals took this strategy in the draft this last year where they were taking bats with their first two picks. They were sort of bats early, pitching later. And it's interesting because the Guardians, you'll see that they don't have great pitching because they spend all of their top draft picks on pitchers. It doesn't work that way. They find a lot of value later in the draft on pitching by identifying traits that they need or that they think they can work with and then developing them really, really well. And I'm hoping that that's something like what we're seeing the Royals turn into, where it's going to be like, we're going to find that excess value in pitching later in the draft and then develop those guys into useful pieces that, you know, through guys like Sweeney and Bovee and Justin Friedman, who we're going to talk about in a little bit earlier or a little bit later, and who Alec Marsh brought up repeatedly in our interview. You know, these are the people we really need to be the forefront of our development if we're going to turn into what seemingly John Sherman wants the Royals to turn into, which is a pitching factory that pumps out pitchers that always keep us competitive.
Yeah, gosh, I would love that. That would be that is the way you stay competitive, not have the 2 years where you're really competitive and 5 years where you lose 100 games. If you can produce that starting pitching, you can stay competitive year after year after year.
I think another thing that's interesting about both of these guys, when you hear people talk about them, is there seems to be a pattern in the type of person they're trying to hire now in coaching and player development. And the number one pattern is obviously very data literate. These people seem to all have great reputations when it comes to understanding analytics and using data in player development. And then two, and I like this one too, they all seem to be praised for their communication. They seem like they're all teachers at heart. They know how to communicate these complicated things in fairly simple terms so players can understand them and don't feel overloaded by information. And I think that's going to be really valuable. Another theme, honestly, that Marsh will bring up in our interview is the ways in which it can feel like sometimes data gets overbearing and overwhelming, and how the Royals are trying to make that simpler for players to understand. I like that a lot. One of the things that scared me a little bit in the last month or so, it just happened about a week ago, J.J. Picollo and Matt Quattrero both went down to the winter meetings. Everybody's excited. Ooh, are the Royals going to make deals? Are the Royals going to make deals? They didn't make any deals, so just take it easy. Just calm down, okay? What they did was they talked to the media quite a bit. And so instead of making deals, they were talking about why they didn't want to necessarily make deals. And one of the quotes that J.J. Picollo came up with in an article from Anthony, I'm going to call it, Mike, how do I say that in the last name?
Castrovins,
that's what we're going to say. An article from Anthony Castrovins on MLB.com. In it, J.J. came out with this quote. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to talk about why it scared the crap out of me. J.J. said, quote, you know about what's been said about our pitching, J.J. Picollo said. Then he went on to say, we don't feel like our guys have had a hard time getting through the minor leagues. It's really the big leagues that's been the hurdle for us. So simplifying things in the major leagues is the focus. It sounds so simple, but it's really throwing strike one. Mike, why might that scare the living crap out of me?
It scares the living crap out of you because the Royals had one of the worst minor league pitching systems in minor league baseball all last year. They didn't have one pitching prospect, perform exceptionally well in minor league baseball last year.
Yeah,
and if you've seen the rankings, if you look at the rankings for their leagues they were in, it gets even worse. You're like, oh my gosh. I think was it Double A? I think it was Double A. They were 30th out of 30 teams in Double A. It was like,
I'm going to look this up because I want to give credit to this person. Jeff Wayman is his name on Twitter. Give him a follow at Pets and Pucks. He does a lot of writing about the Royals and things. And he came out with this. He went and looked up every Royals affiliate in 2022. In 2022, all the Royals minor league teams combined walked 4.5 batters per 9 innings cumulatively. 4.5 per 9, right? As an entire system, that is atrocious. Very, very bad. And so, yeah, it's not good. The truth is, it's not just on the pitching side. It's not just the major leagues. And that's why that quote really scares me. It is the major leagues. It is the minor leagues. They're having issues up and down the system with pitching development. And the fact that he isn't acknowledging it really scares me because we knew during the Dayton Moore era, one of the great criticisms against Dayton Moore is he just wasn't that aware of his own team and his own system. He evaluated it much better than the public does, public media, than other teams did. He just had a much higher opinion of his own guys than anyone else did, and that caused big problems. You have to accurately evaluate your own team. And right now, that comment makes me like, JJ, did you watch any of these minor league games? Have you looked at these minor league numbers? They're not good, buddy. Just because guys can get to the majors sometimes, that's not great. I think it was one of those things.
I think he's really commenting there on that group of college pitchers from that 2016 draft because they cruised. Some because they performed well, others because they were put in situations where they had to be promoted, and some just were mistakes. And so, I think, those guys cruised through the minors. Everything after that has been struggle fest. You got guys who will do really well at one level, get promoted and be destroyed. You've got guys who have trouble staying healthy. It hasn't looked all that good. You haven't seen a lot of progress with anybody after that group from 2016. Now, hopefully that changes. And we've seen kind of time periods where it's like, okay, this guy had a good year. 2 years ago, we had some guys that had really good years in Alec Marsh, Jonathan Bolin, Drew Parrish, some of those guys. But move forward 1 year, and the consistency, I guess, hasn't been there. Maybe that's the best way of putting it. The consistency hasn't been there at the minor league level. And so, that's a little bit scary to me.
And maybe we give him the benefit of the doubt because, it is a soundbite. It is a quote. You can't be fully articulate in a news article somebody else is writing about you and that sort of thing. I will say that I think a large part of the issue is even with those guys who cruised through the minors, the Jackson Kowars, the Brady Singers, Chris Bubich and all that.
Hernandez.
Even with those. Hernandez
skipping
Lynch,
levels. Bubich skipping levels. Yeah.
Even with those guys, I think the Royals erred. I think they erred majorly having them skip levels and moving them forward so fast. But I think the big part of the error was they didn't understand what was actually going to make them successful at the next level. They let them move on despite the fact that they weren't doing things that were necessarily going to make them effective at the next level. And, I think that's the big, the minor leagues isn't for just being successful and winning or being, it's for doing what's going to make you successful in the major leagues. And right now they just haven't done that enough. And you see that it's normal for players to struggle making that transition. It's not normal for them to struggle as much as the Royals have struggled making that transition. And so it's something I hope as we sort of see moving forward, that's just something that they're saying publicly, but also trying to do some things to address that pitching development in the minor leagues. And I think that they're doing it, but maybe we'll see if they're doing it aggressively enough.
I think Chris Bubich is the perfect case study for that argument right there. He had a devastating changeup coming out of college, and in minor league baseball, that will get you phenomenal success and great numbers, and it'll look like, well, he led minor league baseball in strikeouts. I mean, the guy was untouchable. But if you were actually watching and you knew what makes you successful at the major league level, nobody's going to go, well, he's already got what it takes to be at the major league level. But they moved him along anyway, just because he was having success and he had the numbers. What you need to be telling him is, don't throw that changeup. You need to be working on location with your fastball. You need to be working on your breaking ball, whatever it's going to be for him, if it's the curveball or if he develops a slider, whatever. But They should have been having him do that instead of leaning on that changeup that he was already comfortable with for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, and we are recording on Wednesday, December 7th. Yesterday, the Royals participated in Major League Baseball's first ever MLB draft lottery. And you can tell that the Royals are a cursed team to some degree with the outcome of this draft lottery. The Royals had the 5th best odds to get the top overall pick. Instead, they ended up with the 8th pick. So not only did they would have had the best odds, I guess you could say, to get the 5th pick. They ended up with the 8th pick. And so, yeah, not tremendous. They lost about $1 million worth of bonus pool money because of falling those 3 spots. And as a result, they will not have the 5th best pick as they had the 5th worst record. So the first time ever with the draft lottery, and it kind of kicks the Royals right in the butt. Mike, do you have any thoughts on the draft lottery, how it turned out, any of that?
Yeah, my biggest thing is the money is the biggest problem. Like that's the killer, is that your draft pool gets smaller. Major League Baseball draft is so different from something like the NBA, where they also do a lottery system. In the NBA, who the best players coming in or coming out are usually pretty well defined. You know, you'll get some outliers there and things like that. And development's also important. I don't want to put that down or anything, but you know, when LeBron James comes out, you know he's going to be the number 1 pick. So when you get that lottery pick, it's going to be huge, right? The best 3 players are usually pretty well known. Major League Baseball draft is nothing like that because development is so much more important than who you're taking. But the talent level at the top is that. The thing the Royals have been able to do is use that pool money, you know, strategically, and this hurts them with that because they'll get less of it. So it does suck, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to get a talented guy at 8. You know? Right.
It still has more to do with how you're scouting and what your model is and all that sort of stuff. The communication between your player development and your scouting program and things like that. So, but yeah, it does kind of suck to first year of the lottery and the Royals end up on the wrong side of it. Classic Royals.
Classic. I about put that out there. Classic Royals.
So yesterday was December 6th. Today was December 7th. And today was the last day of the winter meetings, which means the Rule 5 draft happened. I held our episode until today so that we could cover what happened in the Rule 5 draft. For the Royals, virtually nothing. The Royals...
Super anticlimactic.
I know.
I held it for a whole day. What happened? Nothing.
Nothing happened. You know what would have happened? If we would have ran the episode yesterday, they would have drafted 3 dudes in the Rule 5 draft today or something.
They'd have cut Ryan O'Hearn and drafted
Ryan O'Hearn and drafted the next Nolan Ryan in the Rule 5 draft. No, so the Royals went into the draft today, the Rule 5 draft, with a full 40-man roster, meaning they were not eligible to select someone. None of their draft-eligible players were selected either. I was a little worried that TJ Sycamore might be, or maybe so there was some talk that Logan Porter might be taken, yeah. But he wasn't taken either. Mike, for me, this was a missed opportunity to collect some talent from what I thought was a strong Rule 5 pool this year. It looked like a really good Rule 5 pool to me. How do you feel about the Royals' decision to not draft at all, to keep their 40-man full, and to just let this opportunity go by?
What I don't understand is, for a team like the Royals, it never hurts to draft a guy in the Rule 5. You can go, okay, we'll take the guy who's the pitcher who is best. Let's just take him, you know, because who we like the best. Let's just take him. Because even if you get it, yes, you have to keep him on your Major League roster for however length of time. It's the whole season?
It's the whole season, yeah, basically.
Okay. But okay. Let's say you do that and then you realize, okay, this isn't going to work out. Just get rid of him. Just send him back. It's not that big a deal, you know? Yes, you would have to get someone off your 40-man. But all you have to do is go to your 40-man, start picking out dudes and go, is he going to be a part of the next successful Royals team? If the answer is no, replace him with a guy in the 40-man or replace him with a guy in the Rule 5 draft. He could be a part of the next successful Royals team. You never know. Joakim Soria, ladies and gentlemen. That's all I have to say. Joakim Soria. All right.
Even Brad
Dan
Keller
was also, yeah,
was successful for a couple of years.
Yeah, I just don't get it. Like, it doesn't hurt you at all to do it. So why not? You know,
that's the thing. The Rule 5 draft is one of those things that is an opportunity to get an infusion of cheap, controllable talent into your team. Right? Is it a long shot that they work out? Sure, but it's a low risk long shot. It doesn't cost you virtually anything. It costs you $100,000 and you get this player. That's it. That's nothing to a major league team. And so, yeah, I think it's a huge missed opportunity. Is it marginal to some degree because most Rule 5 picks don't work out? Sure. But add up all the little marginal things that the Royals keep, missing the opportunity to do or missing up on. And that's ultimately leads to like big things. They add up over time. And, I'm just of the mind that they could have used some of the relievers that were in there. They could have used some of the starting pitchers that were in the 405 draft. They could have used some of these guys and given them a chance instead of, giving Michael A. Taylor, or like keeping Michael A. Taylor. He still hasn't been traded. Instead of, keeping Ryan O'Hearn on the roster. There are just so many opportunities to have a go into, and that's the thing. Like typically you would say the worst teams, the teams that finish with the worst record have the worst rosters, right? So they make the most Rule 5 picks. That's generally the case. The New York Mets, who are going to have a payroll exceeding $300 million, thought that their roster could use a Rule 5 pick. They picked somebody in the Rule 5. If the Mets roster is bad enough that it could use a Rule 5 pick, the Royals roster is bad enough that they could use 2 or 3 Rule 5 picks. Okay? So I don't understand where the thinking is. I don't know why they're making the decision to stick with guys who have proven that they don't belong either in the major leagues or on the Royals in the future. No problem. Michael A. Taylor's a very good player, but he's not a part of the next successful Royals team. I don't know why they made that decision. They did decide to select somebody during the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft. They took a guy named Shervin Newton. He's a 23-year-old shortstop / third baseman. And he's old for his age, struggled at high A last year, has some physical tools, strikes out way too much. So we'll see on him. The long shot guy. But again, in the Rule 5 draft, you take long shots because that's what you should. It's free to do. If somebody said, hey, I'll give you this lottery ticket, it's virtually free. Would you take it? Yeah.
I'd take it. I paid $10 for some yesterday. I'd definitely take it.
It's really, really, really important to us that you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whatever platform you use. We haven't gotten a review in a while. We would love a review on Apple Podcasts or something like that so we can come out and read it on the air. Subscribing, rating, and reviewing helps more people find the show and lets us know we're doing something right and you want us to produce more content. Plus, Mike can't have his figgy pudding until he gets his subscriber numbers up. His wife won't let him do that sort of thing. She's very hard on him. He needs help. Give him those subscriber numbers. Give him those awesome reviews. It's free. It takes about half a second, but it does us a world of good. So please jump in there and give us some reviews. And make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We're tweeting up a storm these days. We're putting stuff out on Facebook and Instagram when we get time. We post a ton of additional content on there. So go ahead and give us a follow, and you can be part of the discourse that we're having there. For our Spotlight segment this week, we are lucky to be joined by 2 very special guests. It would be very lucky if only one of these 2 people were to come on in an episode, but 2 of them have come on. One is Alex Duvall, who runs the Royals Farm Report Twitter feed. He is the former host of the Royals Farm Report podcast and the editor-in-chief of Royals Farm Report, the blog. And then, of course, Alec Marsh, Royals pitching prospect, now a member of the 40-man roster, has joined us for this interview today, too. We are very excited to have him. We are very interested in the insights he can provide about himself as a pitcher, about the Royals minor league system, and about pitching development in the Royals minor league system. And so thank you very much, Alex, and thank you very much, Alec. I am going to mix that up.
It's going to be tough.
I guarantee during this interview. But thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for joining us, especially, or myself especially. Sorry, Mike can't be here for this interview. He's having some baby illness issues. But he will join us for the regular episode tomorrow. Alex, you have the floor to ask our very first question. Go for it.
First off, before we get into the nitty gritty of all this, congratulations, Alec, on making the 40-man roster. I'm sure that's a big career move, and even if it's the off season and we don't really know what spring training is going to hold you, I'm sure that feels good to know you're part of the plan moving forward. To be on that roster is a cool career move.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, super excited. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you very much.
I was one of the reasons I've stepped back from doing what I did last year is I watched a lot of minor league baseball last year. You had one of the weirder seasons I've ever seen. It was kind of a tale of process and results. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about is like that. It is so hard. And coaching high school baseball, we kind of talk about this with our kids too, is like half of my job is to make sure you're ready for the next level, and the other half is to win while you're here.
Yeah.
And in minor league baseball, it's kind of the same thing. And a lot of what you did last year was really good, but a lot of the results, it was just like you hate to just chalk sports up to being lucky and unlucky all the time. But it was like I've never watched somebody get so consistently unlucky to the point where I'm questioning everything that was going on within the game. For anybody listening, 364 batting average on balls in play is kind of unheard of. It's one of the highest marks in Double-A. If you subtract ERA or FIP from ERA, it's kind of something we use again to judge that, kind of like with hitters we use xWOBA. 1.49 was the third highest mark in all of Double-A. So your strikeouts were way up. So as you're having some success in some departments and you're having some bad luck in other departments, how do you remind yourself throughout the course of a season while you're trying to win games that ultimately it's the process that matters, and stay positive in that regard?
Yeah, man, it was really tough. I think, especially week by week, I think there was a period of time where I gave up 7 runs in a row for 6 starts or something like that. And it was prior, and I think I ended up getting invited to the Futures games after that happened, and it didn't make any sense to me when that did happen. But it was just kind of a reassuring thing, okay, I know I'm really good. I know I have the stuff, and I know I just need to keep working, and it's eventually going to flip over. And my turning point didn't even end up happening until I got to AAA. And I think that was I just had a tough year in Double-A, and obviously, some unlucky stuff. But I think it was too, the controllables. I was so caught up on. I felt like every pitch had the weight of the world on my shoulders, right? So there was a lot of things I needed to learn and go through, and I needed to go through that process in order to do what I'm doing this off season to get ready for next year. So I'm actually kind of grateful that all that stuff happened, because it taught me a lot about myself, and it taught me to keep getting up and keep fighting, because it was a long season, and it wasn't just long for me. It was long for that whole team. That whole team had a rough year. So. Obviously, all the good guys got out early, and the math and stuff like that. But it was other than that, the guys that stayed, they went through the grind, and I thought it only made us better in the end. But it was definitely something that needed to be happened.
Okay, we mentioned we talk a little bit about process and how we can sort of focus on that instead of necessarily all the results. Baseball is in some ways, a results-oriented game, but it's really the process that's going to get you there. I have a question about your process, and that is, what does your week look like for some of our fans who don't know the day in, day out for a pitcher preparing, a starting pitcher especially? What does your week look like in terms of how you prepare for a given start? Who are you talking to? What kinds of information are you prioritizing as you prepare?
Yeah, well, I think it changes as you move up the levels, right? When you're in the rookie ball, the single-A levels, it's kind of you're still trying to find out who you are. And then once you get to Double-A, you're established. It's more of a prospect league, right? Everyone's got really good stuff. So then you're starting to figure out the scouting and, all right, how do I dissect teams? What guys do I have to look out for and keep that up in the bank when I'm pitching and stuff like that? But for a weekly, in Double-A, I think we were on a 6-man rotation. So I throw a bullpen every 3 days, and I throw, I got start. I got 2 days. I'm lifting those 2 days, doing conditioning, and then my 3rd day I'm throwing a bullpen. Probably the day before the bullpen, we're doing a scouting report, checking out the other team, and then just watching the games, watching these guys talking shop during games, writing stuff down on all these hitters. And Double-A was more of a learning experience for the scouting department, because that doesn't really get introduced until you get to Double-A. But once we're there and we're doing all the scouting and stuff like that, and then it starts to come into play, and you start to think these are the top guys that I have to look out for, and then you end up having the year that I had, and it's some things don't make sense, but you just keep going and you keep learning from those processes, and it was kind of something that clicked for me towards the end of the year, but it just took longer than normal.
So how much of that information is that you get in a given week is about yourself and about what you're doing in those bullpens or what you're doing in those outings? Do you get to see stuff about your own spin rates and how they're working, your own movement and things like that?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's very much so. And some of it can be, overbearing. Some of it can be, not enough. It's kind of finding that middle ground, right? Because we're in a day and age where analytics are so important, and we've made that transition. where, you know, we're throwing a wrap soda machines and bullpens. We're getting that instantaneous feedback. And if something's not working like it used to, then you're trying to figure that out, right? So that's kind of what, like, we can make an example of 2020. I was a very, you know, high vert guy. I was throwing fastballs at the top of the zone that were getting a lot of swing and miss and stuff like that. And then I went through an injury coming back in this AA season. I started throwing a lot more cutters, so it kind of was messing with my command. So trying to figure that stuff out and catch play, figure it out on the mound, and pulling all that stuff together can be a grueling process, because you're just butting heads with people. You're trying to figure things out. You're like, why is stuff not the same? And then you're just constantly focused on the wrong stuff, right? Because as a pitcher, all it comes down to is execution. And that was something that took me a long time to learn, something that I'm still studying on, but it's like execution is the only thing that matters when you're on the mound. But when you start thinking about things like, you know, like I need to be here and checkpoint this and checkpoint that, and things get out of control.
Marcus was asking about information. And one thing I love talking to pitchers about is, when do you decide to go your strength versus a hitter's weakness? And maybe you can identify, like, hey, here's a hitter who, let's just say, for example, that Alec Marsh's best out pitch versus a lefty is a slider down and in. But you have a left-handed hitter coming up who that's his best pitch to hit. Mm-hmm. And there's always this fun battle between, here's my best pitch, which is also your favorite pitch to hit, the pitch you have the most success on. How much fun is it to go through different hitters and scout them? But like, at what point, like, have you ever seen a guy think, that guy is so good against what I do well? Mm-hmm. He's so good, I'm willing to go a different direction and try something else.
Definitely, but it's also like, I can't wait because he hasn't seen mine yet, right? So yeah. It's like the
he ain't seen my heat.
Yeah, it's like the Gagne versus Bonds, right? The 100-miler heater versus the power hitter. You know, that stuff, it gets really fun because it's like, you know I can get him here, but then part of it's the mind game where you're trying to set it up, where it's like you're making him look away. All right, slider down and in. That's putting yourself in a better position where your strength plays even more, I think is, and especially when you start to move up the levels, you start to realize that a little more. And hitters are kind of just looking in their certain zones because they know their weaknesses and they're not messing with that. So you really got to know, like, some guys will just cut the plate in half and they won't. I've seen guys, especially when I got to AAA, they're just taking really good pitches, and sometimes they're not even in really good locations, but it's just not the hitter's location. So then he's waiting for you to make a mistake in his zone, and he won't miss that zone. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's definitely fun.
Last question about your process here, and then I want to ask you about something specific from AA this past year. Have you ever faced a hitter, and I know you didn't get to pitch in the futures game, but you were around all those guys, so maybe one of them stands out. But have you ever faced a hitter when they step in the box, you've got a game plan, and maybe it's a really good hitter. You know it's a guy who's going to have a lot of success. You know you need to work ahead. You throw a really good first pitch, and he spits on it, and you're just shit.
Yeah, Jordan Walker was probably in AA. He hit a lot of balls really hard off me. I think I might have got him a couple times. But it was like, I just remember that same scenario. I think I threw an 0-0 changeup to him because that was something that he was, we were able to roll. He was able to roll those over and possibly get a ground ball. There was a guy in first. So we're trying to beat stuff into the ground with him because he's going to make contact. He's not a guy that's going to swing and miss a lot. And it was probably one of the better changeups I just remember throwing in a long time. And there wasn't even any budge to it. Right. And that's kind of like, as a pitcher, you're like, damn, dude, it's like now I really got to work, because he's looking for something and he's looking for something good. And then, next thing you know, he hits something 110 into the gap, and it's like, okay.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we had Nicholas Batters on the Royals Farm Report podcast before we folded it up. And he was saying that, and I don't know how I missed this. I never heard about this. I never saw it during the season, but they changed the balls on you guys twice last year, where they were experimenting with different it was the different rub on the ball, right? So different textures, different thicknesses, different materials, whatever it was, and they changed it on you twice. How hard is it? And I think the average fan, because not everybody, but everybody's thrown a baseball, right? And everybody thinks, well, it can't be that hard
it's just
to throw
fear.
It. It's different. It is. Yeah. It is when you're talking about very precise grips and pressures, trying to rip a ball 95 miles an hour, like the slightest like misapplication of that mud or whatever it is can make all kinds of difference. How hard was it to adjust at every time they change the ball on you?
It's definitely, and back to going to things that I've learned a lot over the past even month or so since the season, and what I'm doing in the off season is like I'm really focused on like controlling what I can control. I remember when that happened, because a lot of guys were just like pissed off. Like it felt a lot different. It did. It took me about 3 weeks to figure out my slider again. But like when you're in that, you're in the season, there's nothing you can do, right? So it's like, it is what it is. You got to make it work. You got to figure it out. And I always think about, when you're in the backyard playing wiffle ball, you get one that's really scuffed up, you get one that's not, you still figure out a way, right? So that's kind of the mentality behind that. But yeah, it definitely plays a factor. You got to start figuring out, even messing with different grips or messing with different rosin techniques and stuff like that, just because some of them you can't really get a grip on them. And I think the hardest thing for guys was the balls that were coming out in games. Not one of them felt the same. There were some that were chalky. There were some that were a little rubbed up more. There were some that weren't rubbed up more. And we're in a game of consistency, so that definitely helps when that stuff feels consistent. But what to do? We don't make the rules, right? We're just there to throw balls. So sometimes you got to just throw it in the back pocket.
We mentioned a little bit before this interview started, we were talking a little bit about the change in Royals pitching development. I'm curious, what's been communicated to you about the changes in Royals pitching development that have taken place over the last couple of months? And did that impact how you approach the offseason in any sort of way?
Yeah, definitely. They're working. So we got this guy, Justin Friedman. We got, Mitch Stetter's been there for a while on the analytical side, but they made up some really, really good, just throwing programs and drills and stuff for us to do based on what our numbers were with our physicals. And, I did a couple mocaps with the Royals where I went to Nebraska and I put on, the motion sensors, and we got an in-depth skeletal look at my mechanics and stuff like that. So, they put together this pamphlet that's really, really nice. It's easy access. It's something that's been a big change for us this off season. And I think the biggest, I went down there to camp during instructs and stuff, and was just talking to the guys that were around that were doing the new stuff with Friedman and Stetter, and they really liked it. Everyone seemed like they were into it. And even all the strength coaches and everybody was like, this is the best instructs we've had, from a productivity standpoint, because everything is laid out a lot smoother. It's tailored as well. So not everyone's doing the same thing. If someone needs a certain drill, that's going to help them. If someone needs a certain plyo ball technique or something like that, then it's tailored to them. And that ends up, that's where you have a base level where everyone has the same drills, right? And once you get into professional baseball and you want to start, if you want to get to the big leagues, you got to do things that separates yourself from other people, right? And that's kind of the approach they're taking, which is nice. Everyone's kind of getting their own treatment, and getting their own ideas on different drills and stuff that's helping out with their body, that's going to allow them to move in a specific manner to get the best of, what they can get out of their body. So
you mentioned earlier that you were coming back from an injury, and as you came back, everything was a little bit different. You start cutting the ball versus getting a lot of rise at the top of the zone. How much of that do you think was intentional, and how much of that, like going into an off season now where you maybe feel a little more comfortable, you've kind of had a year to look back and go, okay, I'm cutting the ball a little bit more. Like, is that something that you feel like with the new group that you'll be able to play into? And I'm not saying you're going to turn into Mariano Rivera and just throw cutters all the time.
Yeah.
But like you can specifically, hey, I'm going to throw a cutter here versus just letting your fastball cut a little bit naturally?
I've definitely thought about that, and I kind of wish almost at the time we would have changed the grip and just went to a cutter or something that played a little better. Because I think it was more of a mental thing for me, where I was like, I just kept bugging myself about it, and I wanted it back so bad, because when my heater played it, what it was in 2020 was unreal. Like, I just got a lot of swing and miss in area where even if I missed the spot with where I was throwing, I could get away with it. Whereas in AA this past year, like if I were to miss in a certain direction, I wasn't getting away with 94 in that spot anymore. So that was a struggle for me, and it kind of messed with me up here a little bit. I was just banging my head against the wall for a while. And sometimes I wish I would have gone back and kind of just taken a deep breath and like, all right, let's figure something else out for now. When we get into the off season, we'll get the heater back because we'll be in a more controlled environment. But right now it's about competing. Right. So that's kind of what it came down to. I mean, I think the last month and a half of the season, the stats were the stats, and the wins and losses were the wins and losses. And I was like, all right, like there's nothing we can do to fix that at this point. Right. So now let's just go out there and compete with what I have, and then we'll figure it out in the off season. Whatever happens, happens. And that's when I started to kind of relax a little bit. I felt a lot better mentally. And that definitely helped to kind of transition into the off season for sure.
Last thing I want to ask you about before we ask about the offseason some more is something you made me think of while you were talking there, is the idea that something I tweeted about it recently too, and it cracks me up because pitchers are throwing harder than they ever have, more consistently, with better builds and shapes to their fastballs. It's the best fastballs we've ever seen, and simultaneously throwing fewer of them all the time.
Yeah.
I can imagine that getting to a point in your career where you can reach back and get 97, whatever, maybe you need it, living in the 90s is just a great feeling. And then analyzing the data a little more is like, man, like the trend is to stop throwing them. Like how, and maybe you haven't, this isn't something that you've done yourself, but is there something to that? Like, is there something to the idea that we have an era of the best fastballs ever and we're throwing fewer of them? Or do you think it's like maybe we've just been so far behind on the idea? Because, by the way, the reason I'm thinking about this for anybody listening is Alec throws two very good, very distinct breaking balls. And in my head, it would probably be easy for you to sit there and think, well, I throw 95, I'm going to throw 95. But sometimes it's like, man, I throw two really good breaking balls too. It's almost like I don't have time to throw all my fun pitches. Like I'm running out of stuff to do. So I don't know. Is that something that you think is interesting, or is there something to it?
I mean, it's definitely, I think just because of how good the breaking balls are too, right? Like it's not just the fastballs that are played up, but the movement pitches are just so much harder to hit. And guys are realizing that too. And they're only getting better. And they're getting harder, and that's because they're so hard. That's why they're using like heaters as a setup pitch. It's because of the tunneling, right? Because guys' sliders are 88 to 92 now. So it's like that's a normal fastball, or used to be a normal fastball, and it's sticking on plane for so long and then dropping off. And it's almost like, to the human eye, it's almost like impossible to distinguish. But I think, too, like even looking back on the season, like there was days where I was just like, my fastball sucks right now. I'm just going to throw a ton of sliders and stuff. And like we completely flipped the script. I mean, we tried everything. And it was like I was almost getting the same result with all these new things I was trying. But there was some days where I was like, all right, I would make it to the fourth with like one hit, no runs. And I would have thrown, I started, instead of throwing 20 sliders, I threw 35, 40. And it was like, okay, well, that makes, all right, let's keep playing with that. We'll try that. And, we'll mix it up a little bit. But then it was taken away from my heater even more. So it was just like finding that balance and finding what works best. Sometimes it's just trial and error.
That makes total sense.
We were talking about the new guys that are in, and there's been kind of this wave of change in terms of who's running the pitching side of things for the Royals. Do you have any hopes? Like, this is kind of where I hope that the direction the organization will go. Like anything that, and maybe we don't go back and talk about what was, but moving forward, like, is there anything that you're looking forward to, anything exciting, anything that you've seen a small glimpse of this offseason in Instructs that specifically has you really excited for where the organization's heading?
Yeah, I think what I mentioned earlier, like about what I saw in Instructs and just talking to the guys and what Friedman and all those, and the new guys are doing, it's just like, it's reassuring that, okay, we're getting it, like we're on the right path. We're starting to use the analytics a little more. We're starting to tailor programs to guys because this is what they need. And I think that's the biggest excitement for me, and having the new management in the big leagues as well, to see how these guys do. I've only heard great things about Sweeney and Cronchwell and stuff like that, but it's been great. So very excited to see what goes on up there, and hopefully getting there too is going to be exciting. So
will you do anything this offseason that kind of ramps up your timeline for being ready now that you're on the 40-man roster, or do you think you'll probably treat this like a normal offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I went through this same process 2 years ago because I went to big league camp in 2020, and that was coming off the alt site. So we had a late, we were playing all the way into like November, I think it was, or something like that. So we were playing super late, and then we had an earlier spring training. Or for me, it was earlier because I was going to big league camp. So I kind of have a feeling for what that's like, and not only have the feeling for what it's like to be injured and come into spring training too hot versus coming into spring training, too cold. Like last year, I was like, I need to throw a full season. So I came in with, I've been on both ends of the spectrum. So now I kind of know where the middle ground is and what I got to do to show up to give myself the best chance to show these guys what I'm about and also be healthy. So.
With that in mind, is there anything that you would say in 2023, I'm going to prepare to be better at X? What's that thing for you that I want to be better at this going into 2023?
For me, it's up top.
Okay.
Physically, I'm 99% where I'm at physically. I mean, I lift the house. I do everything from the nutrition standpoint to, I'm really locked in with routines and stuff like that. But I've been really crushing the mental performance stuff this offseason because that was where I struggled. I think in Double A, I was always caught up on the last pitch. I was never focused on, where my feet were at, so I was always letting that bug me. And that's just a recipe for disaster, obviously. So it's been really good for me because I've gotten rid of stress and anxiety and all this kind of stuff. So it's been great. I'm definitely going into 23 as a new person, and definitely one that's way more advanced. Because I'm focused on, they always say like 90% mental, right? I always thought it was 90% physical. And then I started doing the stuff on the side, and it's really making sense. So
that's awesome. I think I can't wait to see sort of what that looks like in practice. I think it might be noticeable if you'll be able to look at 2022 film and 2023 film. At least you will be able to see like, the difference in what that looks like physically.
I've noticed the biggest difference in the last 2 months of my life too. Just, from a training standpoint, from even playing catch to getting off the mound here and there too. It's been great. So
that's awesome. All right. Well, I have a fun question to sort of end us off here, and I'll have to give credit to my partner because she's a foodie who kind of came up with this question. You are from Wisconsin, famous for its exquisite cheeses.
Yes.
Okay. F, marry, kill, Gouda, cheddar, Brie, go.
F, marry, kill, Gouda, Brie, and what was the other one?
Cheddar.
Cheddar. I'm marrying cheddar. And F and Brie.
Yeah. All right. You and I are on the same page on this one.
So I did not realize you were from Wisconsin. I don't know why. Maybe it's because you went to Arizona State. And even like when we started this, I'm like, I just don't know if I buy it. And then I don't remember what you said earlier. Go maybe or no. I was like, there it is. Like, okay,
there it is.
I can hear it. I can hear it in the O, the way that the O comes off.
The eggs, the bags and the. I get made fun of every time I go home. I come back, it's a little stronger, but.
He was telling me before we got started, I can't handle the cold up there. I'm in Arizona right now. I don't go back for long stretches anymore because it's too cold up there.
Yeah, it's too many clouds too. I need the sunshine.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alec. Thank you for joining me, Alex. I really appreciate it. Loved having you on. Very insightful stuff. Hope you have a great 2023. We'll be watching. I'm coming down for spring training, so I'll say hi to you while I'm down there. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it, guys.
We'll end this week's episode like we end every episode with our Just About Outside segment, where we talk about something that's interesting to us outside the world of baseball. Mike, you're busy all the time now with baby stuff and teaching stuff and taking naps and eating McDonald's. What in that crazy schedule?
That sums it up. Throw in drinking whiskey, and that is literally my whole life.
What in that crazy schedule has jumped out to you as particularly interesting for the last month or so?
So it's going to be related to the child that I have. This is more of a story. So I just want to tell the listening audience what happened. My son has been, since he was born, has been quite robust, right? He's a heavier kid, in the higher percentiles, very active.
Bench is 270, so that's
Bench
nice.
is 270, but just wait till you see him on the Roman deadlift. This kid's just killing it. But he really hadn't ever been sick. He did get thrush for like a small little bit. For those of you who don't know, I know all the baby names or all the illnesses for babies sound like they're from the 1500s.
I was going to say, thrush
God.
sounds like such an old-time disease.
He's been burdened with the thrush.
What is your baby a Victorian barber?
Yes, he is. Okay. He got the consumption. That's all No, and so he had thrush, but it wasn't that bad. Thrush, for those of you that don't have children or don't know, never had children that had it, it's basically like a small fungal infection in his mouth, right? Real easy to fix for him anyway. He didn't get it real bad, so it was really easy for him.
Gross.
So he'd never been sick. He's 9 months old, never been sick. He got on an airplane, okay?
By
he
himself?
Went to Arizona. No, he went to Arizona with my wife. I know. He went to Arizona with my wife to visit family over Thanksgiving. That kid has not stopped being sick since he got on that airplane. Has not stopped. Double ear infection. Now he has hand, foot, and mouth. We think he has another ear infection. He's been to the doctor more in the last 3 weeks than he did from the time he was born to 9 months. Airplanes are disgusting. Okay. And that's my little rant there. We've already, I think, talked about how airlines are criminal and are terrible, but they're just cesspools, and it broke my child. So I'm pretty.
So here's the thing.
That. You should see my kid. He's got he looks like a mutant. He's got stuff all over his face.
Yeah.
They got my boy. They got my boy. They got my boy. They massacred my boy.
Yeah. Well, that's just, that's rough. And he's just adorable as all heck. So
not right now.
Well, let me tell you this. In 2019, I got on a train in London, and I saw a dude on there wearing this ventilator mask thing. And I'm like, well, this dude's good. This is a little overkill, isn't it, guy? I mean, come on, we're just on that train here. Then COVID happened, and now I'm like, I will never get on a plane or a train again without a mask on. Will not happen.
You're like, that guy was a visionary.
He was an innovator. He knew, because they were gross back then too. It wasn't just COVID. It was all gross back then too. We just, gleefully ignored it all, Yeah. Don't get on. Planes are gross. Trains are gross. It's all gross. I'm wearing a mask from now on, no matter what. I'm going to talk about something more pleasant and happy, and that is the show Killing Eve. Okay, pleasant and happy is maybe not the right way to describe it. It's a pleasant experience. It's a fun thing to watch, and I just started watching it again because the new season came out, and I was going to sort of rewatch the last one and then watch the new one, but my partner hadn't seen any of it, and so we just started watching the whole thing over again, and I am reminded how amazing this television show is. The writing is incredible. The acting is incredible. The direction is incredible. It is just a fantastic show. It's actually written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who, if you don't know who that is, she wrote and starred in the show Fleabag. She wrote the newest James Bond movie, I'm pretty sure. She's done so many things and is such a phenomenal writer and
talented lady.
Tremendous show. Very talented lady. Fleabag's too, another incredible show. If you've never seen it, very funny. The weird thing is Killing Eve is about this psychopathic assassin and the woman who is trying to catch her, like who's like British intelligence trying to catch this assassin, and the weird relationship that they form. And it's really, really amazing, but it's also got very funny moments in it. And so if you get a chance, check out Killing Eve. It's on Hulu. Wonderful show. I think it's got 3 or 4 seasons now. I think 4. And this, I think, was the last episode. But Sandra Oh and Jodie Comer, the 2 actresses who star in it, do just an incredible job. And so, yeah, I highly, highly recommend. That's what I'm watching these days. That's what's getting me through this harsh winter without Royals baseball. Mike, what else do we have for this episode?
We don't have anything else. We're done.
All right, then we're done for this episode of Royals Weekly. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much to Alec Marsh for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Alex Duvall. We really appreciate you coming on as well. We'll try and get Alex on as much as we possibly can as we move forward. But thank you all for joining us, for listening. We'll be back again in about a month, I would say. Until then, be good to each other.
And go Royals.